systematic bone breaking, joint dislocation, and torture designed to extract confessions without killing subjects quickly. Medieval interrogation combined physical agony with psychological manipulation through techniques that maximized pain while keeping victims conscious. Professional interrogators studied human anatomy to identify pain maximization points while avoiding fatal injuries that would end questioning sessions. Here's exactly why you'd last seconds in a medieval interrogation, where professional torturers had perfected techniques over centuries to break human resistance through calculated suffering. Medieval interrogation wasn't about dramatic confrontations between heroic prisoners and evil torturers. It was systematic application of pain through techniques designed to break human resistance while extracting information that interrogators wanted to hear. Every torture method was refined through centuries of experience to maximize suffering while maintaining victim consciousness and preventing premature death. Interrogation chambers were designed to maximize psychological impact before physical torture even began. Stone rooms with limited lighting, blood-stained floors, and visible torture instruments created an atmosphere of inevitable suffering that broke some prisoners before torturers touched them. The visual impact of torture tools and evidence of previous sessions functioned as psychological weapons that encouraged confession without physical pain. Professional interrogators understood that anticipation of pain could prove as effective as actual torture for breaking resistance. Showing prisoners torture instruments while explaining their function in graphic detail created terror that weakened psychological defenses. Some prisoners confessed immediately after viewing torture chambers, making actual physical interrogation unnecessary for extracting desired information. Torture sessions followed systematic progressions from lesser to greater pain, giving prisoners multiple opportunities to confess before maximum agony. Interrogators started with relatively mild techniques, thumb screws, finger crushing, that caused intense pain without permanent injury. Each refusal to confess led to escalating torture that demonstrated interrogator willingness to continue until cooperation occurred. The rack represented the most infamous medieval torture device, though real versions worked differently than movie portrayals suggest. Victims were stretched gradually over hours or days, with interrogators controlling tension to maximize joint stress without immediate dislocation. The slow progression created escalating agony that built toward breaking point, while giving prisoners continuous opportunities to end suffering through confession. Rack torture caused systematic joint separation that began with finger and toe joints before progressing to wrists, ankles, shoulders, and hips. Interrogators understood human joint anatomy and adjusted tension to target specific areas based on victim resistance levels. The measured approach meant that torture could continue for extended periods, maximizing pain duration while avoiding quick deaths that would end interrogation sessions. Joint dislocation created agony that intensified over time as separated bones ground against each other with every movement. Dislocated joints became torture mechanisms that continued inflicting pain without additional interrogator effort. Victims experienced increasing agony from their own involuntary movements, creating continuous suffering that broke resistance through sustained pain rather than momentary intensity. Strappado involved hanging victims by wrists tied behind backs, creating shoulder dislocation through body weight alone. The technique required no complex equipment, just rope and somewhere to hang victims, making it popular across medieval Europe. Strappado pain intensified over time as shoulder joints separated further, turning victims' own weight into torture mechanism that continued working without interrogator intervention. Yet these mechanical tortures were only the beginning of interrogation techniques. Water torture took multiple forms, each designed to create drowning sensations while keeping victims alive for extended questioning. Waterboarding involved forcing water into prisoners' mouths and noses to create suffocation panic without actual drowning. The technique could be repeated indefinitely with brief recovery periods between sessions, creating cycles of terror that broke psychological resistance through repeated near-death experiences. Interrogators controlled water torture intensity through water volume, cloth placement, and victim positioning. Precise control allowed them to maintain maximum psychological impact while preventing actual drowning that would end interrogation sessions. The technique left no visible marks, making it valuable for interrogations where physical evidence needed concealment. Forced water consumption created different agony through stomach distension that caused cramping, nausea, and eventual gastric rupture if continued. Interrogators force-fed victims massive water quantities until stomachs expanded painfully, then applied abdominal pressure to intensify agony. The technique caused excruciating internal pain without external injuries, making it effective for breaking resistance while maintaining victim appearance. Heat torture utilized burning metal, boiling water, and flame application to create intense, localized pain that could be precisely controlled and repeated. Interrogators heated metal instruments until they glowed red, then applied them briefly to sensitive body areas, genitals, eyes, tongues, creating immediate, intense agony without killing victims. The technique allowed precise pain dosing that could be calibrated to victim resistance levels. Foot roasting involved placing victims' feet near flames until skin blistered and charred, creating agony that intensified over extended periods. The progressive burning allowed interrogators to increase heat gradually, giving prisoners multiple opportunities to confess as pain escalated. Foot roasting could continue for hours, creating sustained suffering that broke resistance through prolonged torment rather than momentary intensity. Branding created permanent scars while inflicting intense immediate pain, serving dual purposes of torture and lasting punishment. Hot irons pressed against flesh created third-degree burns that took minutes to fully develop, meaning pain intensified after initial application. Victims experienced escalating agony as burns deepened, creating sustained suffering from single torture applications. The psychological component became as important as physical pain in breaking prisoner resistance. Interrogators manipulated victim psychology through techniques designed to destroy hope, create despair, and convince prisoners that cooperation offered their only escape from endless suffering. False promises of release mixed with threats of escalating torture created psychological confusion that weakened resistance more effectively than pure pain. Sleep deprivation broke prisoner resistance without visible injuries or elaborate torture equipment. Guards woke victims whenever they dozed, preventing rest periods necessary for psychological recovery. After several days without sleep, prisoners experienced hallucinations, paranoia, and cognitive collapse that made them susceptible to suggestion and confession. Sensory deprivation involved isolating prisoners in dark, silent cells where time became meaningless and reality began fragmenting. Extended isolation created psychological breakdown characterized by hallucinations, desperate craving for human contact, and willingness to confess to anything for interaction with interrogators. Isolation torture could continue for weeks, systematically destroying prisoner sanity. Forced witnessing involved making prisoners watch others being tortured, creating anticipatory terror about their own upcoming sessions. Watching fellow prisoners scream and break under torture demonstrated inevitable fate, while providing graphic preview of coming agony. Witnessing torture broke some prisoners before they experienced physical pain themselves. Mock executions created death terror without killing prisoners, allowing interrogators to threaten and terrorize repeatedly. Prisoners prepared for execution through elaborate rituals, blindfolds, final words, executioner positioning, only to have execution delayed at the final moment. The psychological trauma of repeated near-death experiences broke resistance through terror rather than pain. Religious manipulation exploited medieval spiritual beliefs to convince prisoners that confessing offered salvation, while resistance guaranteed eternal damnation. Priests participated in interrogations, promising divine forgiveness for confessions while threatening spiritual punishment for continued silence. Religious torture proved particularly effective in societies where spiritual consequences mattered more than physical suffering. The combination of physical and psychological techniques created comprehensive, braking systems that few prisoners could resist indefinitely. Interrogation success depended on understanding that most confessions were false statements given to end suffering, rather than truth revelations. Interrogators cared more about obtaining desired confessions than discovering actual facts, creating torture systems designed to extract predetermined narratives rather than investigate genuine information. Leading questions and suggested confessions guided prisoners towards specific statements that interrogators wanted to hear. Torture intensity increased when prisoners denied desired narratives, but decreased when they agreed with interrogator suggestions. This conditioning trained victims to provide expected confessions regardless of truth. Recorded confessions became legal evidence regardless of torture methods used to extract them, creating systems where torture-obtained statements proved guilt in subsequent trials. Legal frameworks assumed that torture revealed truth rather than generated false confessions, legitimizing torture as investigative technique rather than recognizing it as unreliable evidence creation. Confession extractions served political purposes beyond truth-seeking, with authorities using torture to generate confessions supporting predetermined conclusions. Political prisoners confessed to conspiracies they never committed, heretics admitted to beliefs they never held, and criminals confessed to crimes they never committed, all to end torture that would otherwise continue indefinitely. Torture reliability problems meant that interrogators often tortured innocent people while guilty parties remained free. The confession-focused system incentivized false admissions while providing no verification mechanisms for separating truth from pain-induced lies. Medieval justice systems created torture loops where innocent confessions led to executions while actual criminals avoided detection. The aftermath of torture created permanent damage even among survivors who eventually gained release. Dislocated joints never healed properly, creating chronic pain and limited mobility. Psychological trauma from torture experiences caused lasting mental health problems characterized by nightmares, paranoia, and inability to function normally in society. Medieval interrogation revealed fundamental truth about torture. It doesn't produce reliable information, but instead generates whatever confessions interrogators demand through systematic application of unbearable suffering. The techniques were designed not to discover truth, but to break human resistance and extract predetermined narratives regardless of factual accuracy. Modern understanding of medieval interrogation through movies and television completely misses the systematic nature of torture as state-sanctioned violence designed to extract confessions rather than discover truth. Real medieval interrogation combined physical agony with psychological manipulation through comprehensive systems that few prisoners could resist. The efficiency of medieval torture came from centuries of refinement that identified most effective pain-inducing techniques while maintaining victim consciousness and preventing premature death. Interrogators were skilled technicians who understood human anatomy, psychology, and pain tolerances well enough to calibrate suffering to individual resistance levels. Legal frameworks surrounding medieval torture legitimized systematic violence through procedural rules that made torture-extracted confessions admissible evidence. The legal sanction transformed torture from criminal violence into justified investigative technique, creating systems where state-authorized pain became an acceptable method for enforcing order and extracting compliance. Social acceptance of torture as legitimate tool reflected medieval worldviews where physical suffering served as appropriate method for revealing truth and punishing wrongdoing. Communities supported torture systems because they believed pain forced honesty, while physical punishment deterred future crimes. This cultural acceptance enabled torture's continuation across centuries, despite its unreliability as investigative method. The legacy of medieval interrogation techniques extended far beyond the medieval period, with many torture methods continuing through early modern era and some persisting into the 20th century. The systematic approaches developed during medieval period established templates for state-sanctioned violence that recurred throughout history wherever authorities prioritized confession extraction over genuine investigation. Your comfortable modern legal system, with its protections against coerced confessions, requirements for physical evidence, and prohibitions on torture, would seem impossibly lenient to medieval interrogators who understood that pain was the most efficient method for extracting cooperation and forcing compliance with authority demands. Medieval interrogation wasn't dramatic confrontation. It was systematic pain application designed to extract confessions regardless of truth. Professional interrogators combined physical torture with psychological manipulation through techniques refined over centuries to break human resistance while maintaining consciousness. Modern legal protections would seem impossibly lenient to societies accepting torture as legitimate investigation.